So over here, you see I installed a switch, and when I turn the switch off, the radio is off. Hey, Brian here with DIY Outdoor Life. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, what are you waiting for? We're providing free content to help you get to know your campers better. And if you click that subscribe button, it helps us out. Doesn't cost you anything, and we don't send you any junk mail or anything. Today, we're talking about installing a simple little switch like this on your camper. We're trying to take care of parasitic draw or phantom draw. There's some of these fancy terms out there that have to do with the energy that our camper consumes when we're not using things. So batteries are expensive, and we want to learn how to use electric in the most efficient way possible, and installing a cheap little switch like this that I'll include in the link below is going to get us started and make a huge difference on this camper. So let's check it out. So welcome inside the Bushwhacker. Now the Bushwhacker teardrop is very similar to a lot of other teardrops, or really any camper in the market, in that they have certain devices that are notorious for drawing down our batteries even when we're not using them. Now these culprits, some of them we can address, some of them we cannot. This carbon monoxide detector that also detects explosive gas is something that draws wattage, but it's something that I don't want you messing around with. This has saved people's lives, and there's not any reason why we need to address that. Now, if we have a master switch, that's why we want the master switch on when we're spending the night in here, whether we're using the lights or not. If you are going to run without a battery or stay overnight with your master switch turned off, take the time to buy a portable carbon monoxide detector, one that takes like a 9-volt, and put it up on the wall. And that way you can go boondocking for longer without really risking somebody's health. Now, the radio, however, is something that I want to address. These radios that come in campers are very similar to the ones that come in automobiles. When we turn the ignition, the radio powers on, whether we're using the radio or not. Even if you're not listening to the radio is drawing energy off our battery. When I turn this radio off, it dims the switch, but you see the clock still stays on. Even if I can turn the clock off, this is going to draw off my battery continuously 24 hours a day. So over here, you see I installed a switch. And when I turn the switch off, the radio is off. Now, this is not going to draw any energy off the battery. So a simple switch like this that I got on Amazon, and I'll include in the description as always, there's a little drop-down menu below the video, will show you where I bought this switch. The reason I got this one is because it matches the aesthetic of my camper. I could even get a cheaper one if I wanted just a little toggle switch. This switch that I found has a little housing, and it's installed with 2 little spades on the back. So we're going to show you how to do that today, and it's going to make a huge difference in how we use our camper. Okay, so as far as instructing somebody to do this job, the job only took me a couple minutes, and we're going to pull through it backwards so I can give you a step-by-step process on how to do this properly. Now, I realized that I ended up using like $700 worth of tools to do this job, so I also took the time to go back and see how things could be done simpler with cheaper tools. Of course, usually it takes a little bit longer, but you can do just as good a job. So the first step is, with the power onto your camper, I'm going to pull the fuse that goes to my radio. Now with the fuse pulled, I can still use the light to work in here, but the power to this radio is turned off. Since you don't have a switch installed yet, it'll be easy to tell because there'll be nothing that's displayed on the screen. Now the next thing we need to do is remove the radio from the wall. Now this outer cover, just pries off. You can use a screwdriver or anything to take this off, and you're going to expose 4 screws that hold the stereo into the wall. I already had 2 removed to make this a little bit easier. Next, I'm going to pull the stereo out of the wall. there's going to be some wires behind. Can you see this? There's going to be some wires behind that I pull up out to give myself some room to work. Now, for any of you who've repaired the stereo system that came miswired in the Bushwhacker, you've already done this. Now, this fuse on the back is what I told people to pull when they want to turn their radio off and save energy. When I was doing the review for this camper, that's what I included. Unfortunately, I wasn't very clear, and some folks were pulling this fuse. When you pull this fuse, it actually turns the power off to the galley as well. So this was the fuse that I was talking about. Now, unfortunately as well, if you want to use this radio sometimes, and sometimes you want to conserve energy, this was getting to be a bit of a burden, and that's why we're installing this switch today. Next, we want to locate this red wire. You're going to see a little tag on here that usually says VDC 12, or it says VDC 12 volt. There's a plus sign on it. This is the positive wire to our radio. This is the one that we're interested in. When we install this switch, it's just going to disconnect the positive side of this radio, so all the other wires stay intact. You'll find this wire connected with a little wire nut like this. Now, these are the type of compression wire nuts that in the factory were pinched together with a little tool like this. The only thing you have to do is kind of squeeze around it a little bit, and it'll come right off and leave two wires with bare ends. Now, at this point, you'll see that I've already installed butt ends, so we're going to get to that next. Taking a minute to get out of the Bushwhacker, I'll demonstrate how we're going to connect this switch. See, it's going to require two butt connectors. It's actually a female spade is what they're called, and the size is blue. So two blue female spade connectors, and that's what's going to plug into the back of this switch and be able to crimp over those wires. Now, this kit I'll include in the description, the little drop down arrow. This is very inexpensive. You could also just borrow two of these off a neighbor that might have them, or even ask your mechanic to take two. But in all reality, for like 10 bucks, you have like a lifetime supply of these, and you might use them somewhere else. Now, this little female spade connector will plug right into the back of our switch. The other side is meant to go onto the wire. So we're taking that plus wire, that positive wire from the stereo, we're going to slide it inside this butt connector and we're going to crimp it. Now, you can buy expensive crimping tools, but a tool like this only costs a couple dollars and will do an excellent job. So the first thing that I'm going to do here is slide the back side of this connector over my wire. I just use a little bit of exposed wire. If you have too much in your Bushwhacker, you can trim it a little bit shorter. You only really want about 1/8 of an inch. When you slide it in, make sure all of the metal goes into this center part of the butt connector, but none of the insulation. You don't want the insulation to slick into that metal sleeve. Now, on my crimper here, there's actually a blue section. The blue section goes with the blue butt connector. And I'm just going to squeeze firmly, and the job is done. Now, when I pull on this, there's a very firm connection. This side will be able to plug into the switch that I bought. So I'm going to repeat this step on both of those wires that I removed inside the camper. So we're going to show you that in a second. But first, use your hair dryer, or if you have a heat gun, to close this little heat shrink. When we do this, it makes a very secure connection that's not going to come off when we're going down the road. Couple minutes of heat, and now you have a watertight connection that is a lot more secure than if we just crimped it. So back inside the Bushwhacker, you can see that I've used my heat gun to heat shrink these two female spade connectors that were connected together with a little crimp-on wire nut like this. Now, these are going to plug into this switch here, and it doesn't matter which one you plug into which. It's going to work the same. What you do want to do is try to orient the switch the proper way. On this one, you can see the lettering goes up and down. That way, when it's down, it's off, and when it's up, it's on. If you end up wiring it backwards, you can just pull the switch out and turn it upside down. You don't even have to remove the wires on the back. But to save you a minute, you can always see the little orientation of the numbers and the letters on the switch. Once these two are connected, I'm going to have a switch that will work for this. Now the tricky part here is I want to find a place to put this switch. So let's get into that now. So these switches do not take up much room, but they work best when they're installed on a thinner surface. So for your bushwhacker or for almost any camper, there's gonna be two small studs, like 1/2-inch thick studs on each side of your stereo. So I measured over from the inside by reaching my hand in, but you don't have to be exact. If you do too good a job, you could end up embarrassing your bushwhacker. If you look at some of the factory work in here, you don't have to overdo this. So a few inches over is what I measured, and then I traced out the back of this switch on the wall. You can even use the trim plate when you do that, but you're going to want to cut a slightly bigger hole than the trim plate. Now again, you can use fancier tools like a fine tool, an oscillating tool, a router. I have a rotozip that will do this. But really, anything that you have at home to help you cut out this rectangle hole will work. You can use a drill bit, you can use a jigsaw, you could take your time and just go around it with a smaller drill bit, and then take something like a rasp or a file to make a nicer job. But again, this cut will be covered with the trim, so you don't have to go overboard. Once you're done, your switch should be able to fit into that section. Now I went on this side, you're fine to go on this side. Do be mindful of any wires. Now you'll have access and you can reach your hand in and see if there's any wires where you're cutting and drilling. There really aren't many, but if you stick your hands in, there was one wire there that I just pulled to the back while I was cutting, and it was a very safe job to do. Once you have this installed and your butt connectors ready to go, you're 99% of the way through this job. One little tip that I use when I'm cutting in walls like this is I tape an envelope. You see, I wasn't too neat here, but I tape an envelope underneath where I'm cutting. You can crumble up a piece of paper and stick it in that envelope, and then as you're drilling and you're cutting, all the sawdust falls down into the envelope. When I'm done, you can dump the envelope out, use it again, or you can throw it away, but we have enough sawdust inside these campers. I don't need to add any more. So the next step is I pull both wires out of the hole that we just cut, and I'm going to push the stereo back in just a little bit to give myself some slack. And I'm going to plug both of these female spades into the male spade on the back of this switch. These wires are interchangeable. You can plug them in either way. A good firm push and we're ready to go. Now the next step is to install this switch. Now there's a couple different ways to do this. You can use a short wood screw and put one in the top and one in the bottom, and you're never going to have a problem. You could also drill a little female molly insert in there if you felt better. Now what I do is completely an optional step. But I cut a little section out of plywood that fits the back of the switch. I snake it around the back so I can use a longer screw. It makes it a little bit more secure so I can use like my big toe to turn this switch off before I go to bed. And it doesn't risk sending long screws back there where there's wires that vibrate down the road. Completely optional, but not a bad idea. Now I'm just going to replace this cover plate that covers up the screw holes or any imperfections in our cut. It just slides over, clicks on the top and the bottom, and now we have a fully functioning switch. I'm going to replace this stereo and show us the final product. So to finish up, we're going to throw this fuse back in. Flip the switch up, and the unit comes on. Now that delay is to be expected because again, this style of stereo is typically one that would come on with the ignition of a car or turning the master switch. So you can expect that delay while the internal components require some wattage to get started. But when it's time to go to bed or you're done watching Netflix or anything in here, switch goes off, the unit no longer draws juice. Now I can't run the air conditioner in here because it's too loud with the camera. It's getting really hot. We're going to wrap this one up today. Please hit like and subscribe. We did this whole job a second time just to bring it to you, so I'd really appreciate it if you hit that subscribe button. Have a great day, guys.